It's time for school days. Help for moms and dads of school-age kids.
I tell parents, you're like a training wheel on a bike. Your job isn't to make the bike move. Your job is to keep the bike upright.
Those of us who are the true educators, we really want to be given the opportunity to educate the whole child.
Sometimes we make decisions with our kids on how we think our kids are going to feel in the first 10 minutes versus thinking about 10 months or 10 years.
Oftentimes, as parents, I think we want to protect our kids, but I think one of the greatest gifts we can give them is allow them to experience adversity.
Yeah.
Here are your hosts, David and Danita Bailey.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to a special edition of School Days Help for Moms and Dads of School-Age Kids. I'm Danita Bailey.
And I'm David Bailey.
Violence broke out at our nation's Capitol building on Wednesday, and only a few days into 2021, we find ourselves having to have hard conversations again with our kids. The insurrection on Capitol Hill is an event that many of us are still processing as adults, all while fielding questions from our kids. So Dave, you were in school when everything went down. So how did you find out, first of all? I don't think I've ever asked you that. And then what were the kids saying?
Well, I was already done teaching for the day, so I was in my room just doing some lesson planning things. And then all of our team, we're on group me. And somebody said, "You hear what's happening in D.C.?" And I was like, I don't know what's going on. And so they talked about that. And I looked it up. I was like, "Oh, Lord have mercy." It's like, "Oh no." And then people are like, "Yeah, this is crazy." And I'm like, "Yeah." And I said, "You know what? I could find myself getting sucked into this." And so I say, I'm going to go back to work. And then eventually I'll go back and look at it later. And it wasn't until I got home that I really saw, the scope of it. And I listened to a little bit on the radio going home. But when I saw some of the pictures and what was happening, I was just, my jaw was just wide open. And so, yeah. What were you doing, babe?
Virtual learning with the kids, and it completely stopped. My mom actually called me and she was like, "Hey, do you happen to have your TV on?" Which we never do during the day. And I turned it on, and I just really felt like I needed DJ to see what was happening. DJ's our seventh grader, and gosh, something that we've obviously never seen in our lifetime, and nobody that we know has seen in their lifetime, obviously. And I really wanted him to sit down so we could just have, some good dialogue about what was happening. So I could try to explain what was happening, even though I didn't completely know what was happening. And, kind of the significance of the day and things like that. So, yeah, it was really hard to watch. And I found myself near tears multiple times throughout the day as we were watching the footage, just because that's just such a special place, And, we've seen so many things done there, like, things that Congress is doing. And then we've seen, presidents and very important people laid in state there. And just to see people coming in and disrespecting that place was really, really hard to watch.
Yeah, this has been a very unprecedented 365 days. We're heading up to March 13th from last year. And as we're moving towards that now, this has been totally changed the dynamic of our show, the topics that we're covering. But this is where we are, and this is where our families are at. And this is why we're doing a show on a Saturday with our special guest, which we're going to introduce in just a second here, to come in and help us to make sense of it all. And we want to help you as parents to be better equipped on how to respond and how to help them process, and even in this, hopefully, to help you process as well. So I think, babe, we got to get rolling here.
Sure. So we wanted to do this show because parents are, as we just said, we're once again having to have some really hard conversations with our kids. And from what I've heard from some parents, not even talking to their kids about these things, just not sure how to approach the subject. So one of the things that we did was we asked kids to submit their questions about the siege on the Capitol, and let me tell you, they were real honest. So we're glad that we could include their voices as part of the show today. So today we're going to talk to Victoria Farrar-Meyers, who is a former UTA professor of political science, and she has expertise in the American presidency, as well as James Dickey, former chairman of the Republican Party of Texas, and Katie Flores-Burgess, who is an 8th grade social studies department chair. But before we go any further, let me just say it does take a village. If you hear a great parenting tip or nugget of advice, share it with your parent friends. Facebook it, Instagram it, tweet it, link it in, and add the hashtag School Days Show and hashtag I am School Days. And also, we want you to be a part of the show. So if you have any questions or comments, give us a call at 214-444-5575. Or if you're live with us on Facebook, and I see several of you are, feel free to drop us a question there.
Hey, babe, let me just, if I could say one thing real quick here.
Sure.
As we're heading into this, where we're coming from is our goal is to help your children process what's going on. The goal of this episode is not a political bent. We're not trying to favor one side or the other side, but to help you as a parent, to help your child to process what's going on. And so I just felt the need to say that. I know that wasn't part of the script, but we're not trying to go in on Democrats. We're not trying to go in on Republicans. We're trying to process what we're observing. And so to that end, please be open-minded, no matter where you are, because we know our parents come from different perspectives, and we know they have different angles, and we know that this is a very charged issue. But our goal is to equip ourselves as parents, just to help process what's going on. And so that's something to say that, babe.
Okay. So let's jump right in and actually have our guests introduce themselves. If you could just tell us a little bit about yourself. We'll start with James.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you. I'm so glad to be with you guys. It's been a pleasure to know you over the last few years. I was the chairman of the Republican Party of Texas for 3 years, from 2017 to 2020. Before that, I was chairman of the Travis County Republican Party, and I've been an activist and volunteer for more than a decade. I was actually a delegate to the Republican National Convention in 2008, 2012, 2016. So very involved in that way in presidential politics for a long time. And I'm CEO of a company that helps companies and advocacy groups grow. And so that's what I do now. We've got 3 kids, 26 and 25, who both got married in the last 3 months, and a 16-year-old. All of them grew up in Flower Mound Public Schools, and our 16-year-old, when she started to get ready for high school, asked if she could homeschool. So she's done the University of Texas online homeschool high school program, UT High School, for the last 3 years. She's a junior now.
All right. And, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, James. And Katie.
Hi, good afternoon, and how are you guys doing? My name is Katie Burgess, and I currently teach 8th grade U.S. history, social studies, but within my scope, I also oversee our 7th, 8th, and 9th grade curriculum. My background, I've always had a huge interest in politics. My undergraduate degrees were both public relations and political science, so it's always been an interest for me. It's when we get into that part of the curriculum at school, it's one of the areas that I love, still very passionate about. I also have 3 children. They're all school age, between the ages of 9 and 16. So the topics today are very real for me as well, experiencing it both as a parent as well as in the classroom. So I'm very excited to be here with you guys today.
All right. Well, thank you. Welcome, Katie. And Victoria.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's really great to be with you today. My name is Dr. Victoria Farrar-Meyers. I'm a political scientist who has written, studied, and wrote books and taught on the American presidency and Congress for over 20 years now. I also was a former congressional fellow who actually worked in the U.S. House of Representatives back in 1998 when there was an incident on the Capitol Hill. But above all that, I'm a mom of a 9-year-old who is curious as all get out and who wants to understand this. So, I've had former students contacting me, asking me, how do we make sense of this? As a mom, I'm trying to make sense of it for my 9-year-old. And then just, currently I am a elected official, so trying to make sense of it for a lot of constituents who are asking questions about, what happened and what do we make of this and where do we go from here? So it's great to be with you today.
Well, thank you guys all for joining us. And let's just start right there. We are all our parents. Have you guys seen any signs of uneasiness or anxiety or fear about the safety of our country from either your students or your children?
I'll say for my 3 children, they have all approached it very, very differently. My 9-year-old has had very different questions than my 16-year-old, obviously, but also some anxiety from students at school as well. They're very well, especially in the social media age, because they're just being inundated with so much information from so many different angles. And I think at times it's been just almost too much for them to process. So I am definitely seeing, anxiety in students at school. And then, like I said, with my own 3 children, just different approaches from them as well.
Right.
Hey, Kate, have you noticed any... Okay, amongst adults, there's a lot of divisiveness going on. Are you sensing that amongst the students in school as well?
It's funny because back around the election time, I saw that. I saw a lot of, the students were divided. But after the events happened, I really didn't see that. I saw a lot of, what I did see was fear, but their response was collectively almost, this is not okay. Like they instinctively knew that this was not what should be happening. And so I was shocked because I did expect to hear a lot of division between them, and I didn't.
Wow.
That's really interesting that you said that, Katie, because that's exactly what I've been seeing both with my own son and then also with former students. It's been interesting. We tend to think of a world in terms of partisanship and politics. And really, I think it's about what does it mean to be an American? What does it mean to have what Abraham Lincoln saw as a symbol of our United States of America be invaded? And so it's interesting, my 9-year-old said, 1/3 of me wants to cry and 2/3 of me is angry and I don't know why. And I think, as a parent and as a teacher, I think we need to let people process the emotions, but then we also have to figure our way through those emotions and kind of get to ultimately, what does this say about our nation? And I think, we can't lose track of the fact that, we did have a Senate, United States Senate, and the United States House who did ratify the election. And we do have a president-elect, and politics continues. So it is interesting, Katie, that you said that, because I really expected a lot more partisan rancor. And really what I got is a lot of we, the people of the United States, coming together and let's get past what happened and try to figure out what we make of that going forward.
Victoria, I'm just like to say I'm very proud of your son for the mathematics of the 1/3 and 2/3 as a math teacher. And he's 9. He's already yes, and he can add up the thirds, and the 1/3 and 2/3 is 3/3. Yes, that's just the math nerd to me, but I love it.
My son loves math and everything like in the world. Everything is proportional. So patterns are real. Order and pattern is really important to him. So that is not surprising that he voiced it in that way, because he's trying to figure out for himself sort of how to make everything go back to balance, right? How to get to neutral.
I love it.
some people that I talked to said that they had not had any conversations with their kids. What do you guys think about just kind of avoiding the topic?
As a parent, one of the things I try to do is try to make sure that my kids know it's okay to come to me for the hard topics. And sometimes the easiest way to do that is just bring it up myself. And sometimes I'll do so obliquely, but sometimes it's pretty straightforward. I mean, it was not hard. I was out of town, and so I hadn't had a chance to have an in-person conversation with my 16-year-old daughter until last night. But I just asked her straight up, what did you think of all this? What's your reaction and what's your concerns? And she was very open with me about it.
We actually, James, it's interesting what you did with your 16-year-old, because, we were watching what was going on. And so we actually called a family meeting and sat down and kind of said to our 9-year-old, this is what's happening. Factual, just the facts, this is what's happened. This is what transpired, and kind of let him take it in. And then, my first question to him was, how do you feel about it? And then that's when I got the 1/3, 2/3, right? And then I said, if you have questions more about it, feel free to talk to Dad and I about it, because we've always had an open discussion with him, because to be frank, raising a child in a social media age, I rather him explore those issues with us than try to figure it out on social media. He's still a little too young that, he's not completely exposed as a teenager might be to all the different media outlets. But I think it's important to sort of set a precedent that you talk through facts, and you deal with, there's lots of opinions out there, but let's talk through and process those. And then subsequently, and even just yesterday afternoon, he came back and, his entire 4th grade class decided that this was not okay. They were unhappy about this. And he's like, already he's, the first question he asked was, what can we do to make this better in the future? And so, he's already starting to get through those stages. So I think as parents, we owe our children the opportunity to have that freedom to explore those with us, because there's too many people out there in social media that will try to do it for them. Yeah. And so I think we, at least I think as a parent, I want my child to have all the facts and all good information, try to make good choices, because information fluency is an incredible skill that's necessary in today's world.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
What kind of questions can we ask? Because I think what I did with DJ was, what do you think about what happened? Or no, I said, do you have any questions about what happened? And I got a big fat nothing, So what kind of questions can we ask them to kind of get them talking about things? Because especially if you have teenagers, you kind of get one-word answers and they're not super interested in talking about their feelings and things like that. What do you guys suggest?
Well, certainly you have to build up for this.
I know it's my favorite.
Ideally, as a parent, you build up through while they're toddlers and tweens before they get to the teen years, because everything gets a little more challenging then. But I've found it more successful to ask specifics, like when the first death was reported, right? Okay, someone's been shot. A very relevant way to start the discussion is, did you hear someone was just shot as part of this? What have you heard? And then after that, and what do you think about that? Right. Because it's a low threatening deal, right? I mean, it doesn't take much, and it doesn't take a big leap for pretty much anyone to go, that's terrible.
Right.
Right. Someone was shot. That's terrible. Any other circumstances around it, it's still terrible. Right? A life was lost. And so in tough situations, I found that to be the easiest way to start the conversation, especially with somebody who just isn't naturally talkative, or rather wouldn't talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else?
Well, I think also, asking specific questions like, why is January 6th an important date in the United States? a lot of people didn't know, or even, some former students who had contacted me, said to me, why is this, why this day?
Right.
And I think, it's interesting how many people in the United States don't know that January 6th is prescribed by the United States law, that that's a day that Congress convenes together to certify the electors. The electoral colleges, not the electoral college, but the electoral colleges that took place in all 50 states. And they're certifying the election. Time, place, so I guess one of the things I talked to my son about is like, why is this date important? Mm-hmm. So he kind of understood, it could have randomly happened any other day. Why today? And then also sort of, why is the Capitol such an important symbol in the United States? And why is some violence happening there more seemingly, such a high importance to the entire nation, to the world? Why are world leaders reacting to this? And those are some higher level questions. I'm not all the way there with my 9-year-old, and I'm sure it'll be a while before that. But with some of my college students, they were asking that question, like, why is today such a big deal? Why did it, what was that? And, they were asking questions about why is, we've had riots all over the United States. Why is this such a big deal? And so I think some of those entry questions too. And then that also allows, I think, for teachable moments for us as parents and as educators, is just sort of, get that civics lesson in there about, some of the things that were really happening and why those are important.
Well, a couple of questions that I have about that is, can you explain a little bit of, what is the significance? I mean, not the significance. We know that the votes were ratified, but why is that happening? What exactly was happening? And was there even a chance that the election results could have been overturned on Wednesday? Because it seemed that was what they were trying to do. The protesters were trying to come and thwart that process. So was there a chance that they could even do that? And with the debates that they had in Congress, could they have overturned anything?
Well, the U.S. code that prescribes the process that transpires in the House and Senate convene together to certify the Electoral College results that have already been certified by the states and signed by the individual governors. There is a process that can be challenged. Electors from certain states can be challenged if you have a House of Representatives and a member from the House of Representatives and a member from the U.S. Senate in writing have to petition and state that there was some fundamental problem with either elector or the electoral process. There were several challenges actually that were made. At that point, the convening disbands. The House goes back to the House, the Senate goes back to the Senate. They have a 2-hour minimum, 2-hour maximum, I should say, with a 5-minute minimum for each member to discuss the grounds by which the challenge is that. At the end of the 2 hours, the House and the Senate are mandated to take a vote, a majority consensus by the House and Senate. So in other words, the House and the Senate both say there's no factual grounds to it. They go back, they reconvene as with the president of the Senate, which is the Vice President of the United States who convenes it. And they come back, it's reported, and then they accept and move on. The only way any kind of situation could happen is if both the House and the Senate agree, then they would come back and there would be changes made. In the United States history, that has not occurred unless we go into historical, non-precedential things. But in recent history, this is the way it transpires.
Okay.
Yeah. It's interesting, Victoria. I was watching back, if we recall, in recent history, back during the Bush-Gore election, the challenges there, and how it went to the Supreme Court, and of course it went in favor of Bush, and Al Gore presided over it, and there were Democrats who challenged, and I was just watching this. I was like, wow, this. And I don't ever recall even absorbing this when it happened. But Al Gore, he said to his fellow Democrat, "Do you have the signatures from the Senate?" And he was very procedural in how he did it. And she said no. He said, I cannot take this then we cannot take this issue up. Well, and so I was like, wow. I mean, just that, the point is that there is a process that needs to be done and needs to be adhered to as one. And Katie, I wanted to ask you a question in particular, and kind of with, so we're parents and we're adults and we're living our adulting lives, and I think we all have, wherever we come from, we all have some view of the implications of this election on either us personally or on the American way or on the democratic process. Where kids, on the other hand, like Katie and like where I'm at, I teach middle school as well, and they get up, they go to school, they watch TV, they TikTok and and Instagram and all those things, and so how do we balance the potential chargedness of where we see it as adults, wherever you stand, whatever point of view you have on it, if this happens, then this is going to impact us, or if this doesn't happen, then where a kid is just going to school and doing their homework. Because I think as they get older in life and move from student to maybe going to college or going to work, and then more involved in the process where now they can vote and those things, how do we help them to find a balance at their age versus where maybe we're coming from as a parent? Does that make sense? Is one question SMS, does that make any sense what I'm saying? I hope it does.
Okay, I think I understand. And you got to understand, I come at this from two different perspectives. I come at it as a parent, but also as a social studies teacher. Because within the classroom, my job is not to persuade them politically one way or another.
Right.
My job is to teach them how to find facts, to find information, and to find out what information is credible, to get them to look at a situation from multiple different viewpoints, to think about, okay, I may think this way, you may think a different way, but how can we still, even though with different opinions, still get along?
Right.
How can we talk about this in a pleasant, in a nice way? That's learning how to communicate and how to have those difficult conversations with people who disagree with you, and overnight. So within the classroom, we look at it as, getting them to understand what are the facts of the situation that's going on. From a parent perspective, but again, just trying to get my kids to understand that while this is a big deal, while this is happening, I also, personally try to get my own children to understand that this isn't the only thing going on in their world. I also, and as a teacher too, probably try to get my students to understand, okay, yeah, this is a big deal, but what else do you need to be looking at in your world that are going to impact you? Because for my students, our campus has 7th, 8th, and 9th graders. So for our 9th graders, they're going to be the next generation of voters. And getting them to understand that while you're not a voter now, you do have to start paying attention to the world around you and start processing this. But I think most importantly is getting our students in this social media world where they're getting things coming at them from all different angles, getting them to understand, how do I find the facts? How do I find out what is real? And that's hard.
It is hard. It's hard for adults.
Did I even answer your question?
Katie, are you still there? She's frozen. Okay. So we're going to jump into some questions from our students here. Let me...
Are you ready?
Yeah, I know, right? Are you ready? All right, here's the first one.
My name is Conley, and I am an 8th grader in Arlington. My question is, why weren't there more security guards or police at the Capitol?
It's a question that a lot of people have asked. And Victoria, you actually worked on Capitol Hill, so I'd love to hear what your point of view is on this. And is this something that would you expect something like this? I mean, that's a silly question, but go ahead.
Well,
anybody.
As I said, I was a congressional fellow at the time in 1998 when there was the Capitol Hill shooting. And at that point in time, there was a lot of, for months and year afterwards, a complete redesign of Capitol security. There was hiring additional Capitol police officers. In fact, the Capitol has more police officers than some of our major cities do. In addition, the visitor center was developed underground. So if you've been in DC, you see now there's a visitor station they go through. So, kind of, I think one of the things that's hard for people to process, and this is a really good question by this young man, which is why, if we knew January 6th was a date certain by the U.S. law that this was going to happen, and that social media, you saw lots of discussions about people going there to peacefully assemble, peacefully, utilize their First Amendment rights. Why wasn't there more of a reaction, given the fact that the United States government reacted differently in the Capitol, acted differently in the summer when there were protests during, say, the Black Lives Matter? So, there's an ongoing investigation here. None of us know all the answers. But during what we're learning in subsequent time is that Capitol Police said no to additional reinforcements initially, up until at least 3 days prior, and had been treating this as strictly a freedom of speech, essentially a freedom of speech, rally, not necessarily something that would turn into what it did. And I think that, it leaves a lot of people saying, well, if you knew January 6th was important, if you heard all of these things happening, you should have known better and should have been prepared. Mm-hmm. But I bring out this last summer as a backdrop because there was a lot of negative feedback about the reaction last summer as being an overreaction. And so, in that case, the Capitol Police were looking at this saying, well, we don't want to look like we overreacted again. And yet now we're gnashing our teeth and kind of being upset by the fact that, well, we should have known better and we should have had more. So I think it's hard for us to sort of just, you want to be careful when you're a Monday morning quarterback, right? We weren't on the ground. We weren't there. We weren't sort of in, piece by pieces, as days go on. There will be investigations about this. I heard the words, after 1998, this will never happen again. There will never be a breach of the United States Capitol. That certainly is being called into question now. And, you've already seen a resignation by the chief of the Capitol Police. You've already seen a resignation by the sergeant at arms, both in the House and the Senate. And you are going to see some investigations about what we need to do in the future to prepare for these types of instances. And also, is Capitol security, even today, what it needs to be? So, there's no easy questions to our wonderful individual. What I love about kids is they just get down to it, right? Yep. They just ask us point blank, why weren't we prepared? Mm-hmm. And there is really, right now, all I can say is I don't have a good answer for that. Yeah. And there's a lot of folks that are trying to figure that out. And I think we need to understand that we as Americans need to process through that. We need to work with our legislators and continue to hold the process accountable so that we do get some answers about, and not focus not so much, I think, I would try to be half glass full here and say, we do need to explain what happened and why. But I think more importantly, we can focus for the future on how do we do it better.
Yeah.
Speaking of the future, with the inauguration coming up, there's rumors swirling around of possibly some things continuing as well. I have not, been following, deeply, but then he talks about how things might have been changed for the inauguration as extra precaution, or is it sufficient? I don't know how protection is for those types of things, but any of you guys have any thoughts or insight onto those things as far as how safety is going to be for the inauguration?
Yeah, so the last inauguration I attended was right before 9/11. And it was wonderful and pleasant and a little bit scary how open and easy and free everything was, right? Of course, after 9/11, all of that changed. And you look at the security setup that was at the last inauguration, there were fences and there were roped off areas and people had reserved tickets and their IDs had been checked days in advance and all of that kind of stuff. So there's already a lot more security around inauguration than there was in the past. And I think Victoria, I think she nailed it, that we're very human, so we react to the most recent thing and we try to correct for the most recent thing. And frequently that can be an overcorrection. And no doubt, the mayor of DC saying, do not send federal troops days in advance of this thing was a reaction to the criticisms that came out of the riots. Mm-hmm. And so, they were reacting to that. Well, now we got this. So now we're going to get a reaction to this. So I fully expect things are going to be a whole lot more tight at the inauguration, quite possibly in not necessarily productive ways and not necessarily relevant ways. But this is a deal. My son worked at the Capitol less than 2 years ago, or two years ago. He worked for a representative. I've been in and out of the Capitol buildings over and over again, and most of the time I looked around and there was security, but the nature of the security was very much, TSA-ish, right? It was, let's make sure nobody, brings big weapons through the metal detectors. But other than that, that was kind of what it was built to do. And yeah, we do want to allow peaceful assembly. We do want to allow protest. But they can't allow something like this to happen again. And we've wrestled with that here in Texas. In Texas, there was a group of protesters that in 2013 invaded they were allowed, right? They were allowed to come in. What they weren't allowed to do was disrupt the business of the Senate at the very last day, at the very last minute, at the very deadline. And they did. And the Capitol Police have had to deal with that ever since too. So it is normal human nature to react to whatever was last, and quite frequently, sadly, to overreact.
So Victoria mentioned a little bit about the protest this summer, and Terrence has a question about that.
Hi, my name is Terrence Lamb. I am 13 and in the 8th grade. My question is, why are they different? I marched this summer in a Black Lives Matter protest, and I was scared. Why were the police not scared of them, and they were breaking a law? But the police will say they were afraid of me just living my life.
So he's just wanting to know why there was such a different reaction between the protests from this summer for social injustice and what happened on Wednesday.
So two different things. I don't see much difference in the police reaction towards the end of this summer's riots. Police reaction to those was very similar to what we saw in DC. And in fact, in DC, and the burning that happened and looting that happened in DC, the police did stand back, not take proactive information. In fact, one of the frustrations I've heard some people air is there seems to be a whole lot more investigation into identifying folks involved in this than in any of that stuff. However, the big difference post this is that all of us have a direct relationship to our capital. It is our capital. And how we react to news is based on how personal it is. So those of us who have family in Portland, when Portland was being destroyed, we were really worried about Portland. But 98% of the country doesn't care, right? Doesn't have a personal connection to it. So the difference in our reaction and the size and the scope of our reaction makes sense because we all have this visceral reaction to the fact that it was our symbol of our republic that was attacked, and we all have a personal connection. Where maybe we don't have a reaction, maybe we don't have a personal connection to some of those other places.
Anyone else?
Oh, that's my read.
Well, I think one of the things that we do have a personal connection. I think we all do have a personal connection to this, but I think your student that just asked that question really was asking, is there inequity in the United States, right? Is there inequity in terms of how people react to different types of issues? The answer I think we all want to get to is, that we have equity, and we want to have equity in the way in which things are dealt with. In this particular instance, that picture that shows sort of a military presence on the Capitol steps in the summer, and then the picture fast forward to what happened a couple of days ago where the Capitol Police were overrun, makes people honestly have that kind of question. And I think we do have to have a dialogue about that. And I don't think we need to be afraid to have the dialogue about that. I think,
but it was the DC's mayor's letter who said, "Do not send troops."
Totally agree.
That was a reaction to the reaction to the riots, right? So it wasn't just somebody going, I reacted that way this summer. I don't want to react this way now because of race or because of inequity.
And James, you're absolutely repeating exactly what I said earlier, right? Which is exactly that, which is exactly what I said. I think, we have to put things in bigger pictures, though. And I did put that in a bigger picture when I said that, there was, Capitol Police and, DC determined based on the reaction they received from the military, kind of patrolized presence in the summer, they decided not to do that this time. And as you aptly pointed out, we kind of do the pendulum swing back and forth. But let's get back to this young man's question, which is, we still have a lot of discussions that we need to have regarding, inequities in our system. What do we mean by racial differences? And I do think that it's important for us to pull out of strictly a racial question or us them and go back to what you so aptly said, which is it's about we the people. And so how do we the people rectify our nation, and how do we want our nation to react to these types of things going forward? We want people to have the right to peacefully assemble and to have the freedom of speech, and that's what our Constitution provides. The police at the Capitol did a phenomenal job under very difficult situations because they were attempting to protect the people that they swore to protect, which is the United States of America, the Capitol, and the representatives that were in there. So I think it's important, though, to not just, I think we want to engage this young man in understanding that, there is a difference in perspective. And we need to all come to see, as Katie so said, in the classroom, we want people to be able to talk about our different perspectives and our different life experiences, and how our life experiences speak into how we perceive what happens. And so be able to talk through that freely and be able to kind of put ourselves in somebody else's shoes. And in doing that, maybe get a greater understanding, maybe never totally agree on it, but be able to have a fuller understanding of what we the people really actually means. That's all I was trying to get to with this young man, because I do think it's important that we don't sort of say, no, that's not what happened, or no, I think we try to explain things away really quickly, and that makes us feel better because then we have everything in a nice, neat package. But something like this is not neat. And I think, as educators and as parents, we need to be okay with that. And I think we need to be okay with exploring all avenues so that everybody feels like they have a voice and feel like they're heard.
Yeah, I like that. Absolutely. And we do, as we hear those experiences reflected, and you're absolutely right, we all have unique experiences. And as we hear those reflected as parents, when we hear those reflected from our kids, one of the most challenging things is to be honest with them if what they are reflecting it isn't the whole picture, and it's usually not. We've usually got a whole lot more experience and a whole lot more perspective on stuff. And that's, I guess, the biggest advice I give to my kids is to try to take a step back and to try to look at the bigger picture and remember.
You know, I like to interject real quick here. One of the things I've learned in life is when we're all formed, our lives are formed by our life experiences. And so the lens through which we see the world typically is the lens through which we have lived our world, and that has shaped us. And it's not until we have seen a different perspective, or maybe we became privy to a knowledge that we didn't know in the past, that helps to reevaluate how we're looking at the same thing. So, for example, I was had very great education, which afforded me to be able to get accepted to the U.S. Air Force Academy. And then after my being blind as a bat and realized I couldn't fly anymore, I went back home to the University of Pittsburgh. I started tutoring students in the Pittsburgh public schools, and I went to a suburban high school. And when I think anything of either way, I did my thing, and I worked hard while I was there. But then when I tutored kids from the Pittsburgh public schools, at least at the time, I can't talk about anything at the time and now, but at the time, what was considered advanced mathematics in the Pittsburgh public schools, at least for the kids that I worked with, that would have just been a general academic mathematics course in my high school. And I began to see the inequity there. And then when I came, my first teaching assignment, when I got How We Started Our Foundation, I had one ream of paper, and that was my paper supply for the semester, for the semester. And then I leave there and go to a place where we had Office Depot trips coming every single Friday. And I was like, oh my gosh, you have some schools that have this and some schools have that. But it wasn't until I've been on both sides, and now I'm advocating for students, everywhere I go. But just that, when I began to see the other side of things, is when I began to get a broader perspective of what's really going on. And sometimes I think no matter where we come from, without having the balance of understanding, to James, to your point, to the response of the mayor of DC, but also looking at the injustice and inequality, that when we bring those together and when we look at both sides of it, and there's legitimacy to both, and then how can we come to a reasonable conclusion about how to move forward based upon a full picture. But I think sometimes, if we're not careful as parents, that we can have just one side of the picture without having objectively look at the other side of the picture as well. And I never took debate in high school or college, but I heard that debate is a great way to do that, because debate, they make you argue from both sides.
Right.
And it helps you to see, and you have to defend it just as staunchly, even if you disagree with it, as you do as if you agree with it. And so I think there's something to be said with that. That I think we all just need to, as we share and know and grow. And I love doing research, love academic journals. I'm a nerd like that. But when I show, hey, have you ever considered this before? People are like, oh my gosh, I never knew that before. And that allows us to open up the dialogue and have those conversations. So that's all I got to say.
Yeah, and I think that it's so difficult for us as parents, because we, kind of our whole job is to raise our kids in the values that we have established for ourselves as a family. And so, of course, we're going to be very bent in one direction. And I think that, that's part of Katie's job is, what she was saying is her responsibility is not to give her own personal opinion, but to give them the opportunity to share amongst one another, but then also give them the tools to look for the answers themselves. And so, we're very thankful for the educational system, and we're gonna talk more about that towards the end of the show, as far as what tools can we help parents go towards and access in order to help kids maybe have a more balanced view of things. We do have a couple more questions that we're going to take from the kids here before we move on to that. This is Mia.
Who will be held responsible for Wednesday's events?
Well, I can say that there are clear indications that there are serious investigations into everyone who took illegal action. And I hope that that's true. I believe that's true. I hope that's true. And I would not be surprised at all if we see quick action to properly charge everybody who broke a law.
Mm-hmm.
I think we all, my first gut reaction to that question is we all are culpable in some senses.
Wow.
I think all of us need to do exactly what you were just talking about, which is how do we look at from another vantage point, and how do we somehow rectify different viewpoints and different ways of going through this. I think the lessons of this, there will be people held accountable. Obviously, there's already arrests been made. There's been over 50 arrests made as of this morning, and probably more so. Because of social media, there's identification of more people than ever. And as been articulated earlier, people are also seeing, as we teach our kids, there's consequences to everybody's behavior, right? And so social media makes that consequence a lot easier in a taped. So what's also interesting is private corporations are actually finding people faster than even law enforcement. And private corporations are actually firing people. Now people are like, wait a minute, that's just their First Amendment right. No. The government protects the First Amendment right. Private corporations, if they deem you as violating, their ethics rules or violating their corporations, but they can be fired. So there are consequences here. I think, one of the things I would hope that all of us would take from this, and especially your young people who tend to think that, put everything you live, your entire life on social media, is that they would realize that what you do when it's on social media, it's captured by everybody forever. And so, that there's going to be some consequences. So, it's interesting that the private sector and businesses are reacting just as actually more quickly than even sort of the legal processes. So, and why I say all of us are culpable, because I think we owe ourselves a pause to just say, what does this really tell us about where our nation's going, how we talk to each other, how do we resolve conflicts, and how can we really have that? And I think it's a teachable moment. I guess to go back to the professor moment, right? It's a teachable moment for us. And it will be a teachable moment going forward about, how do we rectify liberty and, law and order, the rule of law, how do we live by a rule of law, and how do we live as a representative democracy and allow these types of things to happen in the United States and still be a provocateur across the world for, law and order democracy, when we have a U.S. congressman saying, he hadn't felt that way since he was in Iraq. So I think we've got some culpability on all our parts to not just sort of skip a beat. I agree with Katie. We all live our own lives. In 2 weeks from now, is this going to be really, on the minds of my 9-year-old? I don't know if it's going to be. But at some point in time, someone's going to have to write a textbook about what transpired. And that textbook, I would hope would explore all these issues we're talking about and not see it from one perspective or another, but really help understand it from, the macro, the micro, and also all different ideas.
Yeah.
That's just my sense.
We are
You're right, Dr. Mark. It was a great lesson in class yesterday. It was a huge conversation about the First Amendment protections are not absolute. That freedom of speech, yes, you're not going to go to jail, but, for things that you might say, but it doesn't mean that it's not going to have consequences outside. And so for these students who do put everything on social media, it was a great lesson because, growing up, I didn't have to worry about my future employer searching me out on Google. Whereas today, we hired 2 teachers this year. And what's the first thing we did? We went to Google to see what was out there about them before we ever considered interviewing them. And so, it was a great lesson. But, and you're right, in 2 weeks, a lot of these students are going to have forgotten about what happens. But what I, within the classroom, the conversations that I want them to keep having are, how do we, we talked to, we just finished our Constitution unit, and I had those words, we the people, up on the wall. We the people of the United States. How do we keep bringing them back? And what's funny, or not funny, but this generation, I've heard so much negativity about this technology generation, that they don't know how to critically think anymore. And, this instant gratification. And yes, we do have some problems with that. But I got to tell you, I'm seeing a lot of great in the classroom with this young generation of students that I don't know that they're going to let these feelings go. They might not in 2 weeks be thinking about the protest, but I don't think that they're going to forget the last year and the way that so many of these situations have made them feel and how they don't like it. And I think that this is going to be the next great generation, hopefully, that we're going to see some change come from these students.
Okay, I'd love to know, in your classroom, how are you teaching the kids to have productive conversations with people that have differing opinions about hot button issues such as politics and race?
First of all, in junior high, with those conversations, we have ground rules before we ever have any conversations, and a lot of it comes down to that, teaching them, okay, when you're going to have this conversation, first of all, make eye contact. You won't make eye contact with someone, the issue really isn't important to you. Listen to everything that they have to say, and learn that it's okay to disagree with their opinion, but that doesn't make that person bad. Within the classroom, we teach some fundamentals. Yes, there are right and wrong. It is wrong to get in a car and not wear a seatbelt. Okay, that's not debate. That's not debatable. But within politics, getting them to understand that people have different perspectives because people have different life experiences. And whereas you may disagree with a war going on somewhere, somebody else might think differently of it because they have a member of the family that's in the military. The COVID issue is a huge debate in the classroom. Students from all different perspectives on that. And obviously some have had some direct experience with it, some haven't. So getting them to understand that people's life experiences play into how they feel about a particular topic. And it is difficult. It's very, very difficult. We try not to have off-the-cuff conversations like that in a junior high setting. If we know that we're going to get into something difficult, we want them to research it first and come in prepared. Have talking points. They have to write it down and they have to think about it. So within the classroom, it's very, very structured. And, obviously as the teacher, if it goes in a direction that it shouldn't, it's easy to turn it back around. But it's hard. I'm not gonna say it's not.
It's interesting that so many lessons I think we as adults and parents could learn.
I was just thinking that. Have some talking points. Don't just go in crazy.
We group according to, people that are like-minded typically, without looking at the other side, and that sometimes things that may be opinion are perceived as absolute. Without having done the research, I was thinking, okay, you could almost make a little brochure on how to help adults have this conversation as well. Real quick, back to Victoria and what you're saying, and you, Katie, about the difference between having the First Amendment right to free speech, but the private sector difference. I think that's something that's very important for people to understand.
Yeah.
Because I see stuff that on social media, people that I know, I'm like, well, okay. I mean, whether I agree or disagree or not is the point, but someone's gonna look at that. Now, if somebody gets mad at me because I post about my Pittsburgh Steelers, and hey, so be it. Because a lot of people are Steelers haters anyway. And I'm a Steelers fan myself. But for example, like this guy one guy that just saw before we came on, he got fired he had on his ID badge from his job.
Oh no.
I'm like, not that I'm condoning what he did, but I'm like, bruh, if you're gonna do, at least don't tell him. And I work here. So I said, that's his job. And so they told his job, he's out the door. You know, and so it's just I think this is kind of well.
It is shocking that so few people really, if you just ask, so few people realize that our Bill of Rights is limitations on government's ability to impose on our rights, and specifically the federal government's ability to impose on our rights. Now, some of those rights and some of those protections have been now and are now enforced broadly, right? So, for example, no private corporation or private citizen is allowed to discriminate in renting a place to you to live because of your race, right? That's a right not to be discriminated against that is now enforced even on private citizens and even on corporations. But, you know, the right for free speech, government doesn't have a right to tell you what you can say or can't say. Even there are some exceptions. But yeah, a private corporation that employs you or a private individual who employs you, you know, part of the deal is that they employ you partly because you help them grow their business and you don't embarrass them. Well, that's a much broader thing than you're not saying something illegal. And it is what it is. And Victoria's absolutely right. We've seen a lot more of that. And yes, I've warned my kids since they first got a phone or first got an ability to get on the computer, anything you put on the internet or social media is going to be online forever. Just think about that every time you get ready to post something or share something.
Or take a picture.
Yeah, if you take it down, people can screenshot it. People, oh yeah, well, click. I screenshot stuff all the time. It's just for other stuff, but even if you take it down, it's too late. Once you put it up there, you're saying to the world, here I am, world. This is what I feel and think. Okay, click. 8 years later, yeah, we found this thing about you, and I've heard about this stuff all the time. And then they have to backpedal and, well, you know, and so that's just not a good thing. You know, so we have to be all mindful, adults too.
Happens to athletes all the time, it seems like. So, Katie, if you could tell us, you talked about this earlier, helping students separate misinformation from factual information and find sources that are credible. This is my pet peeve on Facebook, when somebody is up in arms about something and then you look and it's like, what is that? What is that? And you look and it's like, okay, no other major news outlets are reporting this, so this is fake news. So how do you do that, Katie? What do you provide them with?
Again, you know, it becomes very, very difficult because they want to immediately say, well, Wikipedia said. don't quote me Wikipedia. Getting them to, you know, ask, okay, where did your information come from? You know, did you hear it from somebody who heard it from somebody? Right. You know, we teach all about the difference between primary and secondary sources. So getting them to figure out where is their information coming from and is that source credible? And even if the source is credible, then looking at, does that source have any bias? So it's two different things, because even credible sources are going to have biased information. Mm-hmm. So getting them to look at an event and find different perspectives on the event, and read it and look at it from multiple perspectives. Helps them to determine whether or not, because once they start doing that, if they're looking at it, because even in sources that are going to have bias, the underlying information is still going to be the same. Mm-hmm. So getting them to look at, you know, 3 or 4 different places for information and looking at, okay, what did you, what earlier in the year I had them do something where they had to pull up 4 different places where they could find information about an event. And I said, okay, now highlight, what are the common things through all of these? Okay, those are the facts. That's where your information is getting them to see, What are the facts? Teaching them, fortunately, our resource center is amazing, teaching them how to use websites to determine whether or not websites are credible, teaching them the difference. Honestly, this is going to sound crazy, but teaching them what the .edu.gov.com means at the end of a website. Because they type in, they go to Google and they type in information and so much comes up to that. And then, I encourage them to talk through it. Because if they start talking about it, especially within the classroom or with their parents, if they will talk about it with usually an adult, then the adult can catch the misinformation. But I tell them, if what you're getting is coming through on Snapchat, you need to be careful. You need to look at who are you getting your information from, and what is that person's agenda? What are they trying? We spend a lot of time talking about propaganda in my class, persuading public opinion, taking an event and turning it around to persuade public opinion. And so I get them, okay, ask yourself first and foremost, I have this sitting in front of me. Why did this person post this? What is their agenda? What are they trying to do with this? And that gets them thinking about, well, they're trying to give me information, or they're trying to persuade
me. Yeah. Man, this is something that most adults need to hear right now.
Well, and yes, most adults are not aware that we've had very much advocacy media for almost all of our history. Setting back to presidential elections in the early 1800s, they literally would go and buy newspapers to try to sway the vote in a town. And there were big, there were big issues around that. So we had the image of an impartial, objective media for a handful of decades post World War II. But I don't know how accurate that really ever was, because all of us bring our experience, all of us bring our bias. Even which questions we ask are influenced by our background. And certainly how much of the benefit of the doubt we give anybody else on the other side makes a huge difference. So now I don't mind so much that there is transparent advocacy in media now, and there is undoubtedly in every wing of it. But in terms of raising our kids, two wrongs don't make a right, and try to assume the best intent of the others and try and figure out, if you have the best intent of them, then what does that mean? Then what can I take away from what they just said? And it's just really important to do that.
I think, if I may add just one thing, it's interesting. I was hearing Katie talk about that, and I do that with my college students. And how many of us who are adults, parents, who forget those lessons. And I know I saw some shock from my other panelists when they asked who was accountable, and I said all of us. And why did I say that? Well, the United States Constitution says we the people, right? And it also, if you look at, and here's my political scientist coming out in me, but power and authority for government comes from the people. And that sanctity is transferred through the social contract, through the vote. So it's easy for us to sit back after an event like this and point fingers at one another and try to create blame. In social media, I did a study 15 years ago now on who controls the message was the title of the book. And really, what we find is, and Federalist 10 tells us about, the worst thing that could happen to a representative democracy is the tyranny of the majority. And that the remedies were what? We had created a bigger sphere, created a bigger, so they can't get together, and you created representatives in our democracy. So that was a two. So what does social media do? Social media makes the sphere very small, and it makes it really easy for you to find people that are like you and spend all your life with those folks and never see another side. And I think, when I made that comment and I got kind of like people going, what? It's because I think, that takes us back to the factual points, right? What does the Constitution say? Where's government? Government's not the other. Government is us. I mean, the uniqueness of the United States as a representative democracy, a republic, is the fact that, power and authority comes from the people, separation of powers and checks and balances. Ultimately, if the people are uncomfortable with the direction of this government, they have the power to change it. And I'd like for us to leave sort of parents with that thought, and also hopefully we can transfer that to our kids. I mean, Katie said it best, that our future is sitting in our classrooms today. Right. And we've got to empower them to understand that government really is a formulation of them, and they have the power to make differences and to really bend it to its will, because that is what our founding fathers gave us as a gift. So, I know it sounds a little bit political sciencey professory here, but, going back to the Constitution, going back to Federalist 10, some of the things that we as teachers teach, but, I sometimes I just get like shrill at, when people on Facebook go at each other with not any kind of context of facts whatsoever, because they just feel, in my classrooms, I always say to my students, I'm the 4-year-old that never grew up. So my question always to you is going to be why you think that. Mm-hmm. It's not about what we think, what we feel, what we are. Yes, that's part of our processing point, but ultimately we have to get to why, and then what do we do with that? And so I hope we could use those questions to sort of direct our conversations.
No, that's great. I had no idea we were a bunch of political science. My undergrad 35 years ago was political science and English.
I have a concern about the future of our children as far as their willingness to participate in this election process. We've had so much happen in the last 4 years or so, where we have had Russians hacking the election in 2016, and now President Trump is insisting that he was robbed of the election, and so I feel like there's been so much talk about the instability of our election process that it could make children, or once they're adults and they're able to vote, feel like their vote doesn't count, and feel like, elections are stolen and things like that. So what can we do to revive trust in our country's ability to have a free and fair presidential election, and assure our children that they should be a part of this process and they're an important part of this process?
Well, I couldn't agree with you more that that's been one of the most dangerous narratives that have gone on. And as we now found out, talk about Katie's points about source viability, the fact that there were federal investigators who put any weight on the Seal dossier, and not just any weight, but criminal investigations from a suspect source with anonymous sources. I mean, that was terrible. And when that was revealed, one of the most dangerous things out of that was that the argument was the 2016 election shouldn't be believed. It's just as dangerous now to say that the election has no validity now. And the problem, again, pendulum swings. We've got folks saying there is have total confidence in the outcome. There was not a single bit of fraud anywhere in the country. That's like saying not a one of us had a kid who did anything bad, right? That's not, that is beyond credibility. But we cannot allow people to believe that their votes don't matter, because then if your votes don't matter, then the only recourse left is violence. And that's not productive. That is not a good thing. We cannot let that stand. And so one of the things I'm working on actually is taking the experience I've had in the last 15 years of actually running elections. I've been an election judge, an election clerk, a volunteer deputy road registrar. I've worked in the central counting facilities and all of that. And we've seen imperfections, but there is a world of gap between imperfections that can be improved on and malfeasance that flipped the entire result. And the latter did not happen in 2016 or 2020. And we as parents, one of the best things we can do is let our kids know that the Chicken Little is wrong and has always been wrong. The sky is not falling. The world is not ending. It was not a perfect world yesterday. It will not be a perfect world tomorrow. We are all imperfect, but we live in the greatest country in the world. We have the greatest system in the world. It has checks and balances and protections that have survived 200 years of calamity, that no matter how it feels, even after Wednesday, this country has survived worse, and it will continue to survive, especially if we all do our part. So let's sit down and do our part.
Okay.
Well, and go back to the U.S. Constitution, right? The time, place, and manner of elections are dictated by our states. And so, if you look at the election, this election, it went through the state processes. It was duly certified. The governor of the state has to sign off before it's even transmitted to the process that took place on January 6th. So, are there imperfect types of systems happening at the various state levels? I think a lot of state legislatures you're going to see. I know the Texas state legislature, will deal with budget, but one of the things they want to look at is election integrity. A lot of the states are going back and looking at their systems, their machines, because again, the federal government is not the regulator of this. This is really the states that have to take a look at that. Now, you mentioned though a while ago, Bush v. Gore. If we know anything in the United States is that one vote can make the difference in the outcome of an election. And so whenever, somebody says to me, my one vote doesn't matter, I always pull out historical examples to demonstrate where one votes do matter. And so I think we have to continue to, on one hand, continue to educate that the vote is actually you as a citizen transferring your power and authority to government to make decisions for you. That's a heavier kind of conversation than just saying, voting is what. The other thing, though, I think, though, it is important for the states to make sure that they continue to look at our history is rife. It's not just the last 4 years. Our history is rife with problems with the vote, whether it's been voter suppression or, voter fraud or whatever. I think it behooves us as a nation to continue to always ensure and ask our states to continue to be vigilant about this. And so if we have questions, I think it's important that we explore those within our states, because that's rightfully where it should be happening. So I think that's another thing that we need to continue on both sides to have those conversations. Anyway, so thought.
Hey, babe, I just want to add one more quick thing. So, with all this, everything comes back down to math. You guys know that, right? Everything comes back down to math. And so, I'm looking up as we're seeing it, looking up the, as we've been going through geometric proofs, and we talked about this a little bit before the show about, why they're important. So I wanted to throw a couple little quick definitions out there to kind of tie this into what we're discussing here is that an axiom is a statement we assume to be true. A conjecture is a statement that is being proposed to be a true statement. The proof is the explanation of why a statement is true. And then a corollary is a true statement that is a simple deduction from a theorem or proposition. But that proposition is a less important but nonetheless interesting true statement, but that a theorem is a statement that has been proven to be true. And what we have, if we're not careful, no matter who you are, no matter what side you're on in this debate, is we have a lot of axioms happening out there in the media, the statements we assume to be true, and a lot of conjectures, but not a lot of theorems. And so we need to get to theorems to understand what's happening in the world. And that's why math is the greatest subject of all.
I love it.
Oh, you've got such a
and
big
yeah,
brain.
so to Victoria's point, from a few tens of thousands of votes in a handful of states, certified appropriately, the law followed appropriately, led to the victory of now President-elect Biden.
Yeah, and younger students, for parents trying to, you know, like I said, I have the next generation of voters sitting in my classroom, and it's great to put it in a historical perspective. We always try to take these events and put them, you know, into context. Historically, the timing could not have been more perfect because we had just studied the 1796 and the 1800 elections. And I said, 1796 was a mess. We ended up with a Federalist president and a Democratic Republican vice president. And then 1800, 4 years later, we have a tie in the Electoral College and we have to send it to the House of Representatives. And I said, guess what we did? We fixed it. We threw it out. We passed the 12th Amendment. You know, Congress approved it and the states ratified it, and we fixed it. And it wasn't perfect. We still had problems in 1824 and other elections, but it's worked. It's continued to work. Our process has survived. Our Constitution, we the people, popular sovereignty, we are the ultimate source of government authority. We give them that power through our vote. And I just try to remind students of that all the time. There have been elections that haven't been perfect, but through it all, our Constitution and our republic has survived. And remind them that when they become disenfranchised with that, when they decide not to use that right to vote when given, in not just national elections. You know, I push the agenda for local elections. I show them voter turnout and try to help them understand, you know what, your city council, you need to know what they're doing. Those elections are more relevant to your everyday life.
Sure are. Mm-hmm.
You know, if city council is going to take money away from your local boys and girls club, you know, your local Mansfield Activity Center or whatever it happens to be, that's going to impact you on a day-to-day basis. You know, it's not just the presidential elections that you need to be aware of, but when you give up that right to vote, you allow tyranny to happen, what Madison didn't want, you know, power in the hands of one few or many to accumulate. I said, you allow that to happen, and we fought too hard to get it. So don't lose.
All right. Great last word. I would like to offer some resources for parents. I know several of you guys had some places that you wanted to recommend for parents to go to try to kind of make sense of all of this and help students make some sense of it for themselves as well.
Well, actually, I want to add one thing to what Katie said. City councils and school boards.
Yes.
People should be voting on the school boards.
Yes.
In Texas, it's nearly a half of all of your taxes. And obviously, it affects all of our lives, those of us who have kids in the system and those who don't. It's educating our future. So,
yeah. And I'll put in a plug for one of our episodes. We did a whole episode on the importance of school boards and why we should care about that. So you can go back and listen to that one.
Awesome.
So what are those resources that you guys want to recommend?
Well, I brought up, yeah, I was going to say, I brought up earlier, I mean, obviously, the political scientist in me wants to make everybody go back and look at the Constitution and look at Federalist 10, but I'm not going to do that, okay? You know, parents are just not going to do that. Nobody likes to read that stuff, so whatever.
Give it to me when we're off the air. I'll look at
I will.
I'll have it on the website.
Hey, I like that math. I like that math analogy. I'm loving that. I'm going to have to use that, so we'll have to talk later. But the Congressional Research Service, a lot of people don't know the existence of that. It's a nonpartisan think tank that Congress uses. And they put out Congressional Research Service reports. They're available online. There's one called Counting Electoral Votes, an overview of procedures at the joint session, including objections by members of Congress. So if you really want facts about what was happening, I've given that resource out to a number of people who have just said to me, explain what happens. Like, I didn't even know this meant anything. Like, I thought when I went to the voting booth and I voted for, you know, either Biden or I voted for, you know, Trump, that I was voting for them. It's like, no, you're not voting for them. You're voting for a slate of electors. And so, you know, I think it's important to go back to some of the primary documents, but the Congressional Research Service is written in really plain English. It takes a lot of, you know, legalese and sort of stuff that is hard to go through. So if you want to, you know, give something to your kids that's easy to read, or if you want to just like look it over so you can feel like you're more authoritative in talking about it, oftentimes too, you know, give those resources to my own students in my classrooms so that they can sort of better understand it from an authoritative source that is nonpartisan by nature. so that they can just look at the facts.
Okay. David, you had something too. Uh-oh.
Yes. Yeah. So, and we'll post the direct links because there's a lot of resources on there. But commonsense.org. One is great for everything from movie ratings. So if you want to see exactly what type of stuff is happening in a movie, do you want to screen for your kids? But also has a whole section on media and how to digest, how to cipher through what's happening in social media and how to discern true news from fake news, and pretty much everything that Katie was saying to the T is what it talks about. It goes about it in more detail, and then how to have those meaningful conversations. They have a section on how to have conversations about what just happened on Wednesday, based upon age levels as well. So it's just great to because what you ask a high school is very different than what you ask a second grader. And so it's just a great website for parents, for educators, to help to kind of process what's going on around us as a parent, to help our kids have a good balanced perspective on it. So commonsense.org, but on our website we'll give the specific links to the articles that could be relevant, and maybe for those who want to, I'll put those geometry definitions up there as well, just as a bonus.
Okay, Katie, did you have any?
Yeah, for parents, they're always asking questions. How do I get this information to my child? How do I talk to them? There's a great website. It's called weareteachers.com. And I realize people are saying, but wait a minute, I'm not a teacher. Why would I need this? Well, in your house, you are. You really are a teacher. But I love the site because it does put up credible information, and it does put up things for teachers. How do you talk to your students about this? Well, the same thing's going to happen to parents. How do you talk to your child about these these events? So that is a great resource for parents looking for information.
Weareteachers.com. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And anybody else, or forever hold your peace? Okay.
Well, in January 2021, the three of them will be coming out with a joint book on this topic. On
what's that going to be called?
I just say, look, I love having you guys, your expertise in your areas. I think really brought it all together today in a great way, and you all have your insights and wisdoms that can have all of this. So I know we're grateful that you guys came today. But I would love for you guys to write, like, girl, I would buy the book. I don't know anybody else, but I buy it. Write it for me.
Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. Unfortunately, we're actually way over time, but I knew that this episode was going to be pretty meaty, so we didn't just allocate an hour. But anyway, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Noggin Educational Foundation is the premier sponsor of school days, so we always want to let you guys know what's happening with Noggin. We're currently taking applications for 2 of our programs. Noggin offers 12 hours of free private tutoring to students through our educational coaching program. And also through our ARD advocacy program, parents receive support in securing services and accommodations their kids need at school for learning disabilities and special needs. With the closure of schools, the education gap for low-income students has widened, and the one-on-one intervention we provide is vital. So see our website, nogginfoundation.org. That's Noggin foundation.org, or email me at Doneda, Doneda, at nogginfoundation.org for more details. It's that time of year again for resolutions and goal setting, and we've created a SMART goals and growth mindset kit that's perfect for students and even for us adults. So this 12-page digital toolkit contains worksheets to help develop goals that are SMART. They're specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-sensitive, and to foster a growth mindset, or the belief that talent and intelligence can grow with practice, effort, and experience. So this is a free download that you can find on our website, nogginfoundation.org. On Tuesday, we'll be back to our regularly scheduled time at 5:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. And we're going to sit down with Nelson Dellis, who is a 4-time USA memory champion. They call themselves memory athletes. He's also a mountaineer. He's climbed Everest 3 times, which I'm honestly the most interested in. And he's the author of a book called Memory Superpowers that he's written for kids. So he's going to share with us memory strategies and techniques for academic achievement. So don't forget to tell your parent friends about that one. And also, you can always head to our website, schooldazedshow.com, for more information about all that we're doing with Noggin and for all of the resources that we mention here on School Dazed. And remember, you don't ever have to miss a show. Find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Pandora, Amazon Music, and pretty much anywhere you listen to your favorite podcasts. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Noggin Foundation. That's Noggin. And last but not least, we always want to end the show by saying that David and I are parenting by grace. We depend on God to give us the wisdom and strength that we need to raise our kids into flourishing adults. And if you would like to know more about that, please feel free to email me at info@schooldazedshow.com. Have a great week and stay safe.